Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Maker and the Drink podcast, proudly brought to you by First Drop Wines and the Ozcast Network. If you haven't been up to Nurayutpa to go and check out the home of the brave, I highly recommend it. I travelled on the Northern Connector the other day and it took 38 minutes from Port Adelaide. That's incredible. My name is Jared Walsh. I'm the drinker. John Retzis from First Drop, the maker, I think is still consuming wine, which is it's what he does. They're in the middle of vintage at the Barossa Valley, and we had such an amazing experience a couple of days ago, and that was at Charles Melton. Now, his story is almost unbelievable. Literally, a toss of a coin decided his future. You will not believe this story. And we also did a vertical tasting. So he brought out a Shiraz from 2001, 2011 and 2021. We recorded this in a church which is on their property, and it was amazing. I can't recommend you listen to this anymore because he's just an old-fashioned good bloke who makes amazing wine. And if you want to find out more about this winery, we will put all of the information, their social handles and website, in the show notes and the podcast details. Please make sure you share this. You can rate this. You can subscribe and tell all your friends about the Maker and the Drinker because we are loving doing it. And if you have any wineries that you want JR and myself to go and visit, please let us know because pretty much each week we're just wine tasting and talking to winemakers, and it's fascinating hearing their stories. So enough from me. It's quite creepy how I kind of connected with Charlie as well. I'm a stalker. That's okay. We had a great time. Let's do it. Another episode of the Maker and the Drinker podcast at Charles Melton Wines.
Cool. So here we are in the heart of the Barossa at one of, I guess you could easily say, one of the icons of the Barossa in terms of producers, Charlie Melton. Charlie Melton's the high priest of Grenache in terms of, in my eyes. And when I got here in 2001 and worked just down the street at St Hallett, one of the first winemakers that I met was Charlie. He was great mates with my old boss, Bob McLean, and it's great to be here to talk to Charlie about his wines, his wine label, his life in the Barossa.
You say high priest, and Charlie, we're actually sitting in a church at the moment, which is fitting.
We are, Jared. We're sitting in the old Crondall Village Church. This was built in 1864. The Lutherans, which I guess most people know, the Barossa was settled by the Lutherans back in the 1840s. They were a fractious lot, and if you go to just about every village in the Barossa, there's always two Lutheran churches because they wouldn't worship in each other's church up until 1955. And basically there was the dancing lot and the non-dancing lot. Mm-hmm. So there was half of them thought dancing was a sin, the other half thought it was all right. So we're in our church is connected to the church, and we hope we're the dancing lot. We're not sure.
Right, I have to fix your microphone for a second, JR, because it's doing all weird stuff, which is just what normally happens sometimes. Stand by. That's perfect. Just hold it up there. Can I set the scene quickly about how we've ended up in this church today? Because it was just over a week ago, I was sitting on the Sea Link going over to Kangaroo Island, and I had the opportunity to go over there for the very first time to film something for the Grassroots Cricket Fund, which is cricketers giving back to their grassroots, basically. It's brilliant. Over $30 million donated, which is outstanding. And we were over there at the Western Districts Cricket Club. And when I saw the brief, I was going to be working with Alex Ross. And I thought, oh, well, that's brilliant because I get along really well with Rossi. I've known him through cricket and the Strikers. And I'm sure he was really excited to find out that I was sitting next to him outside on the boat and he was expecting a really quiet trip, and I've chewed his ear off the whole time because it was my first time to Kangaroo Island. But we started talking about wine, and he said, you need to go and check out Dudley Wines over there and some of the other ones. And then we started talking about you, which I find that doing this podcast, everyone has an amazing story, and your story about how you got here really gave me a little bit of a snippet, but I was blown away. And straight away I rang John and I said, we need to talk to Charlie.
Yeah.
And well, I said, actually, we need to talk to Charles. And he's like, yeah, Charlie, great bloke. I said, oh, great. So can you please educate us a little bit on your story?
Oh, as I said, there's been if you read every bit that's written about my journey here, there's a lot of literary license. But the basic truth is that a mate and I were on our way to Uluru back in late 1973, and we got to the Barossa and ran out of money, basically, mainly because most of the money we earned picking grapes went to the publican at the Lindock Hotel when I was a young, lad about town. So in 2023, I came up for my 50th vintage. So the story is that I got here and the ute broke down. I started working for Peter Lim, and then there's a grain of truth in pretty much all of it. But what happened was that we just, drank our earnings at the Lindock Hotel. We got offered a job at Crondorf Winery up the road. We're still on Crondorf Road, so in nearly 50 years I haven't really moved out of Crondorf Road. And Kenny Roach, who's the mate I was travelling with, who's also still here, there was one job in the vineyard and one job in the cellar. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't care. We had no wine background. My family were almost teetotalers. So we tossed a coin. Heads, I got the cellar job. Tails, he got the vineyard job. So he ended up working in the vineyard for the last 50 years, and I started working for Crondorf under Peter Lehman, and here I still am. So that's it, still on Crondorf Road. So it's that simple. It was a very serendipitous thing. A toss of the coin started me on the wine industry journey.
Have you ever thought what would happen if you made the trip to Uluru?
Well, true. I mean, there's lots of what ifs. So it's, I guess it's, it's one of those things. Yeah, I had I went to agricultural school, so agricultural college. So there was kind of a bit of a ag bent in there somewhere, but certainly not to do with wine. And the other, great thing, I married well. Virginia's family arrived here in the 1850s, so she's original, good Lutheran Barossa stock. So that helped my standing in the community a lot.
That's a pretty amazing
especially
story,
in those days where outsiders were, I guess, it was tough to break through, wasn't it?
Seriously, and it's not an apocryphal story. Some of the old timers, you would walk down the street back in the early 70s, and they would still be talking Barossa Deutsch. They would be talking in German.
Really?
The old boys, yeah. And we lost, unfortunately. I don't think we recorded as much of that history as we should have. But there's still a very strong historical link with the old culture. I mean, it's changed a lot now. There's a lot of new generation people, a lot of exciting new winemakers coming in and looking at doing things differently here. But the history is a key cornerstone of the Barossa.
That's
so
fascinating.
Back in those days up at Crondorf, who owned the joint?
Wow, there was a mob of Melbourne businessmen. It was called Augustine. P.T. Falkenberg was the original. Used to be called Falkenbergs, and I got there just as Dalgetty's bought the big pastoral company, and this happens in cycles in the wine industry. Big companies think there's actually money to be made. They suffer the delusion that there's money to be made in the wine game, so they buy a winery. They discover it takes a lot of luck to make, a lot of hard work to make money in the wine game. So Dalgetty's, the big rural company, bought Crondorf and Saltram's, and Stonyfell down in the Adelaide Hills, and they were called Dalgetty Wine Estates, and Peter was the chief winemaker for the group. So that's how I got connected with Peter. And then I transferred from Crondorf to Saltram's, and then Peter, when he built the new Peter Lehman winery, after a slight disagreement with Seagram's, the big Canadian drink company, who'd consequently bought Saltram's off Dalgetty's. We built the new Peter Lehman winery back in 1979. So I went with Peter as a winemaker to the new place. So yeah, and then we started our own business in '84, which was our first crush for Charles Melton.
So I'm going to have a sip. Which one should I be having a sip
Well,
of first?
I thought to give you a look at, because I'm a big fan of as John would know, technically, you've got to look after your wine every single day. I work every day of vintage and doing anywhere from 12 to sort of 18 hours in the middle of vintage, because every day you've got to look after your wine. But once the technical things are done, then you really want to be drinking a bit of history. So what I thought today, I pulled out a 20-year-old, a 10-year-old and a 1-month-old. So you've got 2001 Shiraz, 2011 Shiraz and 2021 Shiraz out of barrel. This is the first ferment that's gone dry and gone into barrel. And you just see.
So should I be tasting the oldest one first? Yeah.
Yeah, because generally, as wines get younger, they're still, and especially when you get to the 21. I mean, the 21 is as raw as not raw in the sense of being harsh or anything, but it's obviously still the tannins
so
are
good.
still apparent. So yeah, I generally start at the oldest wine because it's most evolved and smoothest. And then you go to the middle, the 10-year-old wine, which also is by now is quite smooth. And then we go to the very young wine, the 21, as I say, which only was picked about 6 weeks ago.
So all three are Shiraz, Charlie, all from Southern Barossa?
All from Southern Barossa. All estate grown now. We pretty much grow all of our own grapes apart from one little patch out at Mount Pleasant.
Right. I remember talking to you ages ago, and you always work with wine or work with grapes from the south. You don't sort of pick anything past Tanunda or...
Not generally, no. And I think, again, there are distinct regions in the Barossa. I mean, we sell a lot of wine overseas, and you can't just call it Barossa Shiraz anymore. People want to know, if you go to Burgundy or Italy, some of the famous wine areas, it's never just Bordeaux. There's different little sections and sub-regions. And so people, as Australian wine became famous overseas, we were selling to people who wanted a real level of detail. Barossa Shiraz was just too broad a category. So they wanted to know whether it was Northern Barossa Shiraz, Southern Barossa Shiraz, and then it became, was it Ebenezer, was it Gomersal, was it Lyndoch or Williamstown? And there are differences between North and South, quite a big difference. We would pick 2 weeks in the southern area before the northern area. I think we get more florals and they're finer structured wines in the south. They're bigger, Grange material sort of comes from the northern Barossa, so there's a distinctive difference. And we make perfumed rather than fruity wines, and I like that fineness and elegance. That's our cellar style generally, not so much your big blockbuster red, but a much finer, more linear style.
You can definitely see it in these three wines. Even the 1 month olds, shows some really fine tannin and some beautiful aromatics. That sort of punctuates the Southern Barossa for me is that elegance.
And they still last. I mean, people, there's a bit of a myth out there amongst many drinkers that for a wine to last 20 years, it needs to be massively tannic and almost undrinkable as a young wine. It's simply not true. I mean, if you look at all the great wines of the world, they're really supple, even as young wines. If it's a balanced, the best chance you've got of having a wonderful balanced old drink is if it's a wonderful balanced young drink. If it's out of balance, it's too acidic or too tannic or something when it's young, a fair chance you'll end up with just an old acidic and too tannic wine. I mean, wines can be very balanced, very young, and that balance carries all the way through.
That's amazing, putting my nose into the glass to smell how distinctively different they all are. Like, that's incredible. Yeah. And I think like the 2011, that has probably, that smell stands out the most to me.
There's two reasons for that. Many people, certainly, if you're an avid wine drinker or you're a South Australian, you'll understand that 2011 was probably one of the most troublesome vintages we've had in the last 30, 35 years.
In what way? What do you mean by troublesome?
Very wet, a lot of mould, mildew, etc. It was just one of those vintages. We rarely get them in the Barossa. The last one was 1974, where it rained all vintage, and 11 was very similar. But and so people don't have a big expectation of 2011s, but there were some fantastic wines made. But what you're seeing there, Jared, is we basically we imported some very special oak, 100% new oak, which still there's a whisper of it. The fruit is coming on top of it now, but because we knew we'd had to try and make the very best, most distinctive wine we could from a vintage that people weren't going to think highly of. So there's some lovely, sweet, very high quality oak in there, but the fruit is coming over the top of that now, the sweetness. So yeah, it is quite a quite
Can
a
we
distinct
cheers,
aromatic.
please? We haven't cheersed yet.
Oh, yeah, cheers.
Far
Yeah.
out. Cheers.
So
Cheers.
2011, troublesome, but I think it made I think everyone made some interesting wines in 2011.
Yeah,
and
totally.
and great wineries and great winemakers make great wines every vintage. And Charlie's 2011 is case in point. It's from a difficult year, it just goes to show, and that'll age. It's aged beautifully, and it'll just go forever.
Another 10 years, yeah. easily
Absolutely.
another 10 years. And
Can you tell me? Sorry, I want to go back a little bit, if that's okay. At what point did you go, okay, now I'm ready to start my own business? Because your journey is fascinating so far, but I'm sure you get to a point where you've gone, all right, now it's time to have my name attached to this.
Again, it can be very serendipitous. We, in the mid-'80s, the Barossa was there was a vine, what the government called a vine pull scheme. The government was actually paying grape growers to pull their vineyard out because there was such a surplus of grapes. There was literally no overseas export market the way it has been, for the last 10 or 20 years. And if you were a grape grower, you simply weren't making any money. I mean, there was the true story of Barossa Shiraz, grapes that currently probably bring $5,000, perhaps even up to $10,000 a tonne, if you're selling them, were being sold to go in tip-top muffins. That's how unloved Barossa Shiraz was in the mid-'80s. They were putting it into tip-top muffins to use it, and you just growers couldn't make any money. So the government was helping them get out of the industry by paying them. My memory is, if you pulled out all of your vineyard, you got $5,000 for every acre you pulled out to help you, get off and start a new business or a new career. If you only pulled out half your part of your vineyard, you only got $3,000 an acre. So I had friends who were grape growers who came to me and said, and I was working for Peter Lehman at the time in 1984, and said, I can't sell the grapes. I can't. And we couldn't take them at Lehman's. Yeah, like Lehman's, like many other companies, took as much as they possibly could, and Peter especially, ran a number of schemes to take as much of the grower fruit to try and help them all out, and it was, in the end, it was successful. Growers did get paid. It took a while, but they did get paid. So I said to my mate, well, we can't take it, but how about we turn it into wine? Because I've got the facility. PL would allow me to make a bit of wine on site at Peter's. So we made our first wine in 1984 and turned the Shiraz into a sparkling Burgundy, as we were allowed to call it then, so a red fizz. And of course, then we had wine we had to sell, and I'm a bit of a believer in the old school that I would have felt uncomfortable selling my own wine and working for another company. Yeah. So basically, once we had a couple of other wines we made in '84. And then that was it. 1986, I resigned from Peters, and we launched our first wines on the market.
Did you have any working titles of different names you were potentially going to call it, or was it always going to be that?
Well, not so many people know this. In the industry, everyone knows it. If you ring the winery and ask for Graham Melton, everyone goes, I don't know, who the hell are you talking about? But if you ask for Charlie, everyone in the industry knows. But my proper name is Graham. Charlie is a nickname. And when we were coming up with a name for the label, I thought, Graham Melton Wines, just doesn't have a ring about it, does it? But Charles Melton Wines has an air of quality about it.
That's amazing. That's
Charles
so good.
But as Johnny Retsis knows, no one has ever called me Charles except my wife when I'm in real trouble. But and even then she calls me Graham. Then I know I'm in deep, deep trouble. But, so that's how Charles Melton came around. It's a nickname that my grandfather gave me when I was 2. So, but it had that air of quality and history about it.
That's amazing. Can I ask you both, like, if you can pinpoint one example of one of the biggest learning experiences that you've had going to do this on your own? Because obviously there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of the uncontrollables that you can't do, but you both would have experienced this. Yeah,
I guess, I was lucky, and John was probably similar. John mentioned earlier that he worked for a mate of mine, Bob McLean, who was a legendary entrepreneur in the wine game, a great wine marketer. Not a winemaker at all, just absolutely zip skills in winemaking. And Peter Lehman was the same. Peter, one of the things I learned from Peter was that, as I say, pH is important, Beaumet, acids, all the rest of tannin, all that sort of stuff is important if you're making world-class wine. But the social side of it, treating wine as and I say to my staff, remember, we're in the hospitality business, because that's what wine is about, hospitality. And so that was the first thing when we started our business, was to remember everyone makes great wine these days, really. If you're not making good wine, you won't last in this business, because most wineries in Australia are pretty adept at making a decent bottle of booze. Some better than others occasionally, but that depends on the vintage and the location. But the hospitality side, a lot of them forget that you're making a hospitable drink, and that's the sole reason for wine. It's not there for winemakers to go to wine shows and compare their manhood with each other, because one wine's better than the other.
I've noticed that though, because sorry to interrupt, but what I love about these chats in the podcast is that in many industries, competitors, right? So Rossi's sitting over there, right? And he's in cricket. There could be someone of a similar skill, and it's very difficult if you're a personality type to go up and go, "Hey, well done, you're incredible at what you do," because they're a competitor, especially if you're competing for a spot in the Barossa, all around South Australia. You're all competitors. But John, when we started recording, complimented you on how incredible your wine is. In a lot of other industries, that doesn't happen. No. Because, as you said, it's almost a dick measuring competition. You're being polite. I can say dick. It's fine. Yeah.
Well, it is a competitive. And you know what? When we started our winery, when we started Charles Melton, we were like winery number 393 or something in Australia. Like there was only about 400 odd wineries or something in that year. Well, there's now 2,500. Well, wow. Back in the day, when we used to go to wine shows with Peter Lehman, we would pretty much know everyone at the wine show. Like we knew everyone in the industry, whether Bruce Tyrrell from the Hunter or the guys from Margaret River or wherever. It was a very small collegiate industry. Well, now it's I keep up with the industry. I read and listen to things, but there are brands and labels that pop up, and I go, who the hell are they? Where have they come from? So we've gone in 30 years. We've gone from 400 to 2,500 wineries in the country.
There's also some real cowboys, aren't there, that like to drive around and purchase clean tints and pretend that they're their own. Like there's some real dodgy people in the Barossa Valley. We know that. you guys can't. I can say that.
No, I think there are. We started in the wine game when it was a farming industry.
Yeah.
It's become a bit of a fashion industry these days. So yeah. I still have a ute that's done 352,000 kilometres. So I haven't got a new Range Rover.
That's the best. You have.
Speak. Yeah. What car do you drive, Johnny?
Speak the National Australia.
And Can you talk to us? This is a kind of question without notice. Can you talk to us a little bit about your family? Like, is this something that you want to pass on to your family?
Yeah. Well, the connection you made with Rossi, and he did say to me, he'd really enjoyed you sitting down on the ferry. He said, "Thank Christ, it was only a 45 minutes." But no,
I asked him every question about Kangaroo Island. So why do they call it Kangaroo Island? Like, just everything, mate.
He's an expert on Kea. Well, the connection is, Alex is my daughter's partner, and our youngest daughter Sophie is a winemaker. She works at Thorne Clark Wines, but one of her main claims to fame is that she won the Grant Hardy Smith medal at Adelaide Uni for winemaking and viticulture, which is it's been going for 70 years. It was an award, which means most outstanding student in the winemaking course. So, we'd like to think she's got a big future ahead of her. We won't see her for a long time yet. She's got a lot of experience to get, a lot of travel to do.
Yeah.
And I reckon I've still got, a few good years left in me yet. And, until I become the whiting king of the York Peninsula.
You're a big fisherman?
Well, yeah, I just don't have a boat quite as long as I'd like at the moment. But
I should show I caught a Tommy I'll show you this. I went to West Beach on the weekend and I caught a Tommy, and I'm not a fisher person at all. I'm horrific. Basically, I would love to get your reaction on the biggest fish that I caught, which, look, no one's really impressed with. That's the biggest fish that I caught on the weekend. You see that little one? Yeah.
Size does matter when it comes to Tommies.
That's right. You just picked the wrong variety to catch,
Can I ask a couple of questions? As I'm gonna try this brand newie. It's a freshie.
Yep. So that's...
I'm starting to understand when people say it tastes young.
Yeah, it does. That is almost a jujube, sort of your morella jube, like not lolly-ish, but it's certainly very primary fruit.
Yeah.
That hasn't gone through Malay yet, the malolactic fermentation, which is getting really technical, but it's a conversion of a harsher acid into a softer acid, which will happen over the next month or two.
Yep.
But it's a really primary thing, as I say, almost like a black morella jube But it also has, again, simply the weight, which is one of the great things about Barossa wine. If you talk to, not wine experts by any means, just talk to people, when you put a glass of red wine in your mouth, you want a mouthful of wine. You want to feel a richness and a warmth. That's if you want something refreshing. If I want something really refreshing in a hot summer's day, I'll drink beer, quite frankly. Unless I'm forced to drink Sauvignon Blanc, but that's another whole story altogether. But if you, when
it's going
people
really well until you said Sauvignon Blanc.
When people put a glass of red in their mouth, one of the things about Barossa Reds, you get a degree of generosity and richness. So you feel like you have a lovely, rich mouthful of wine, and that is the Barossa style. And sometimes that's massively in fashion. Another decade, it could be out of fashion. But the thing about the Barossa is that it stayed true to its stylistic, origins and objectives, and lets fashion pass it by. And we're lucky enough, we've been going long enough, 180 years, that we can do that. We don't have anything. Well, we have to prove everything every day, like every area does. But we have a grounding and a basis that people know what to expect,
I wanted to ask a couple of questions to finish off because we've taken too much of your time and we are very grateful for it. But normally what happens, we get to the end of a podcast and I absorb everything that you've said. And I just love sitting back and listening to John and yourself chat because it's something that I'm learning more about, but we're very lucky to be able to do that. We get to an end of a podcast and I ask some pretty simple questions because the name of the podcast is The Maker and the Drinker. JR talks about the making stuff. I just talk about consuming it. So, when we spoke to Ian Hongel from Torbreck, we spoke about basically charging for tastings and things like that. My naive question for this episode is about spittoons, because I think they are offensive, and I've never spat into one because I think if I'm going to do a tasting, I'm going to drink as much as I can and enjoy it, because I don't want to waste what the winemaker has actually decided to give me. But I'm sure you would have a different perspective. Everyone's different. My wife's here, right? So my father-in-law comes with me wine tasting, and he spits out, and I'm like, I don't want to be sitting next to you. Yeah. Just drink the bloody drink.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Well, you're sitting here, Jared, at the table, and I did bring some spittoons down.
All the spittoons are empty, Jared.
I'm not spitting. Yeah, we're not spitting. Why would I want to waste any of this?
Well, and this, I'll take it from elegant to gross in a couple of quick steps. You'll notice in the bottom of our spittoons there's shredded paper.
Yes.
So there's no splashback, which is often a problem. But back in the day, when we were starting the business and we had to do the rounds of liquor stores, etc., and do tastings on a Saturday morning in the cellars in Adelaide who were selling our wine, there was a man who used to come to the tasting with a plastic cup on a chain around his neck, and he would taste and then spit into the plastic cup. Well, you could imagine after half a dozen wines what the plastic cup, and he would come up to your stand with this plastic cup around his neck. Now that is untenable.
I can understand that. The next thing I wanted to ask was about where can we get your wines? Obviously, if we want people to come to the cellar door and stuff, but I guess for what the relationship that I've formed with John is I can understand, like, if I can recommend to people and go, if you want an entry level wine, this is great. But you know what? If you want a big dog, then go for this. Can you tell us about that for consumers who are listening?
Especially at the moment with COVID, most small wineries, I would have thought a very rare exception, want to see people at cellar door. Apart from the fact that they're buying wine direct, but it's just, with the border closures, etc., South Australia's had a bit of a torrid time in terms of not having the normal flow of tourists through. So, and South Australians, we had an extraordinary busy weekend on the Adelaide Cup weekend. South Australians have been fantastically supportive of their own wine industry, but come to the cellar door. Otherwise, we really just sell in specialised wine stores. We're not in the major chains, so you'll have to hunt us down a bit. But we're set up at cellar door for people to have a great time. We have a great outlook. I have a great team in cellar door who are super wine savvy, and they can answer all the questions that you're asking with, and go into a lot of technical detail about the wine. But most wineries would just love to have people on site because it's easier to tell the story. They can see what you're doing right at the spot.
John,
absolutely. As Charlie was saying earlier, it's all about hospitality, and the best way to enjoy a wine experience at Charles Melton or anywhere is to visit the home, taste the wine, hear the stories, and be immersed in the whole culture of the brand.
Yeah, and they become indelible. When you go overseas and you just when we were able to go overseas the year before last, we went to Italy, and just to sit in an Italian wine area and just look out at the hills and have a glass of wine in your hand, that remains in your mind. And you know what? There is some poor sod sitting in, chipping Snodbury in London, wishing they were sitting in the Barossa right now with a glass of red in their hand.
That's what I found about when Rossi said to me, go have a look at Dudley.
Yeah.
And the sitting there and looking over the beautiful scenery was amazing. And that's what sitting here in this church is. It's an experience, and sitting down. Wine, I'm sure wine making is a journey, but as yours has been, and drinking wine you're educating us on the history.
Well, the key is every time you have a glass of Dudley wine, or you have a glass of any wine, your mind will cast back to all those fantastic places you've sat and had a glass of wine. And that is what wine drinking is about. It's about memories, it's about sharing, friends you've had those glasses of wine with. That's equally as important. You'd be able to, it's not what vintage it was or whatever, it was just, I find in the end, and I do remember because that's part of my job, but wow, remember the day we had that bottle of red with
exactly.
a group of friends? That's what wine's really all about.
Two more things. Quickly, JR, we've got a great strike rate because we haven't spoken to someone yet that you don't get along with, which is brilliant. I'm looking forward to that podcast where it's going to be really frosty. But I know you mentioned at the start, can you describe Charlie and I guess what he means to the Barossa Valley, and I guess how you know him for people.
Yeah, like I said, I started working in the Barossa in 2001, just down the street at St. Hallett. And there was always a camaraderie that the Barossa had and still has. And Charlie was the part of that glue, with Peter Lehman and Bob and, Hill Smith up the road and a few other Barossa icons. So Charlie's an important part of the fabric and the culture and the history of the Barossa as the next generation of winemakers comes through Charlie and
absolutely
we look at the Charlie Meltons and the Peter Lehmans and they've unfortunately gone, but it's really important that we have these people that have been here for a long time that understand the place and can tell the stories. It's all about stories.
And we've got the best of both worlds at the moment. We've got old blokes like myself and the sort of people you mentioned, but we've got another generation of young men and women who are doing some really interesting out of left field stuff, and so it gives the Barossa both that great image of history and solidarity and longevity, but it also gives it an edge of wild and funky and crazy, which it just puts us in a great place at the moment.
Yeah, we've got an equal amount of excitement and an equal amount of history.
Yeah, so
in a region that's fundamentally 180 years old.
Yeah.
So not many Australian wine regions can say you're both 180 years old, but also got some young punk. Doing
a lot of young punks, and they're doing some exciting stuff. So it's So all I say to those young winemakers is just defend your style. Be so proud of the style that you're making that you will defend it.
And take care of your ute.
Take care of you. And just finally, probably the most important question of this whole podcast is, how do you get red wine out of a white shirt that you're wearing at the moment?
Well, that's. I nearly did change, but I thought no, and it won't come out.
It's
Jared,
so authentic. I love it because it's all over your hands and it's the best.
Thankfully, I wear my shirts about as long as I keep my ute. So this one's probably due for retirement anyway.
That is so good, mate. We are so grateful for your time, but also to be tasting decades of wine and learning your story. Like it does get down to, as you said, a flip of a coin, and we would be trespassing in someone else's church then if the flip of the coin went someone else's way. So thanks for sharing your story with us sharing your wine. It's been amazing. JR, this has been awesome.
Great chat. Thanks,
Charlie.
boys.
Thanks, Jared.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.